So, can I proceed, Madam Speaker? Yes. So I was saying, this thing should bother us, and it must disturb any leader that we continue to talk about it, but there's very little that is being done. A few weeks ago, Madam Speaker, when one of the 7 top decision-making members of it's called the Chinese, I forget the exact name, political bureau or something, visited the country. As part of his delegation, there was a gentleman whose equivalent in Kenya will be the CEO of the EACC. He was part of his traveling delegation. And when we sat down at the state banquet that was held in the honor of that visiting delegation, I sat next to him. And we had conversations about what he does. And there are a few things that he shared with me. He told me that in the Chinese society, they have 3 strategies that they have used to fight corruption. They said we classify the corrupt in 3 categories. The tigers, I forget the second one, and the last one was a dragon or an insect. They said the tigers are people like you and me, the high and mighty, those that serve in big public offices. And they said that is where they dedicate their biggest energy and resources. And the reason being, they are used to create an example to the ordinary citizen, where when they are arrested or when they are found culpable, and you have watched how they even prescribe death penalty on very high-ranking public officials, including ministers, the minute they are found to have participated in theft of public resources, Madam Speaker. And he said that strategy has continued to work because it sets an example to other people. I believe that the day we shall be able to jail a few senior public officials, then the war against corruption will take the right trajectory. But so long as it is known that once you've been caught and you're convicted, the lower court will perhaps hand you a verdict, then you'll move to the high court, you'll get a reprieve, you will be released. There must be a reasoned argument, especially, Madam Speaker, where there is involvement of loss of public funds. Before a judge issues a reprieve against, say, the magistrate's court and high court, releasing a suspect or a convicted person to allow them to appeal and serve or stay in the public as a battle their appeal, Madam Speaker. At that particular time, if that was to happen, and so long as it is not driven by witch hunt or political machinations, Madam Speaker, we will have followed that particular strategy of theirs on how to deal with the tigers, the big boys and girls, the ones that are supposed to set an example. Because you know, if you're a boss in the office and you are not involved in corrupt practices, Madam Speaker, then people, even your juniors, those that serve under you, they'll begin to follow the example. The lower level staff, Madam Speaker, I believe, borrow the practices. The second category, he told me, are the mid-level managers and people that serve, civil servants, Madam Speaker, that serve in various government and state agencies, that they have a unit specifically dedicated for such people, Madam Speaker. The ones who are the spanner boys in corrupt dealings. The ones who, even when administrations change, they don't care much because they know they'll have their way anyway. That it is important also to go after such. And I hope EACC will also focus and turn their attention over and above such people, Madam Speaker, so that we set a good example and people can know that if you participate in such activities, you will be jailed. That's why we are passing this conflict of interest bill, Madam Speaker, so that you declare conflict and say, I don't think I can serve dutifully members of the public, so allow me to go to the private sector, do my job, make my profit, and live a decent life. Many people, Madam Speaker, believe, and rightfully so, that unfortunately, the weakest link is with our judiciary. You listen to them many times and they say, oh, what do we do if the investigators don't bring to us a watertight case? Give it to them. It's a sound argument, because I also wouldn't wish that we jail people that perhaps have just been tried because of their political choices and so on and so forth. You know for a fact that this country from history has a culture of using this war on corruption to fight political wars. That cannot be taken away, Madam Speaker. And therefore, that's part of the cleanup that we are doing here, including the declaration of interest and trying to tighten the laws on who are the scope of people. Many of these governors, for example, that you see being jailed, it is on account of doing business with the wife, with the daughters, with the brothers, you know, running it within family, Madam Speaker. It is my hope, Madam Speaker, that with the passage of this particular amended version of the bill, will actually help to conclude on that battle. Because I strongly believe, Madam Speaker, that as a country, we run a very significant risk. I saw NACADA the other day release a report, which I don't know if colleague senators, you took time to listen to the CEO of NACADA speak and say 45% of our university students consume and use drugs. Just imagine, that's almost 50%, almost half of our university and college students. What kind of a country are we talking about here? That is terrible, Madam Speaker. That's still a subset of corruption, because it tells you that they are facilitators. They are people who are allowing drugs and narcotics to get into the country. And until we slay this dragon of corruption, then that number will continue to increase. And that means it's your brother, it's your sister, it's your son, it's your daughter. Madam Speaker, this should concern us. In fact, I said to the CS for Interior the other day that my good friend, because I watched him, he was part of the people who were present in that function when NACADA was releasing that report. Because I know he knows the Bible, I said, just like Esther was told, you have been put there for such a time as this. I said to him, if there is a battle that you must fight with every ounce of energy that is in you, is this fight against drugs and narcotics that is permeating our society and getting into the hands of our young people who are still in high school and colleges and universities, Madam Speaker. Because if it is true, and I have no reason to doubt the report of a competent authority such as NACADA, that 45% of our students are consuming these drugs, Madam Speaker, then it means there's no future for this country. Because it means by the time they are graduating, they'll have lost it. And we must ask ourselves, where is it coming from? Remember, Kenya is an island that is surrounded by a good number of failed states or regions or countries where society, the government don't have full control of their regions. And therefore, there are regions that are being mentioned. I know, for example, the border with Ethiopia is a very notorious route that is being mentioned, that lots of drugs, Somalia also, to the north, because of the lawlessness in certain parts of that particular country, drugs find their way into the country, and they come, and there are people who provide protection in our colleges and universities, including people whose duty should have otherwise been to ensure that our young people learn in safe spaces. We must speak about these things, Madam Speaker, and be concerned even as a house. And so many other things that are a subset of corruption. I was just mentioning that specific point on the battle on drug abuse, Madam Speaker, to strengthen or buttress the point that I made earlier that all our societal struggles as a country, they stem down from corruption. And as such, unless and until we are able to properly address ourselves to the challenge of corruption as a nation, Madam Speaker, we shall continue to do all these battles with very minimal success, Madam Speaker. I hope that today, once we conclude on the passage of this bill, dear colleagues, that we shall send it to EACC, to the President for his assent next week, and EACC can begin on their work with strength, with zeal, with courage, without any further excuse, Madam Speaker, because I believe it is not for lack of good laws, but still because they strongly feel that this law is a missing ingredient in their fight against corruption, that this is one of the pillars and the areas, Madam Speaker, where if we are able to tighten the news, then we will have reduced the proliferation of corruption in our public dealings, Madam Speaker, then so be it. With those many remarks, Madam Speaker, I beg to support and urge my colleagues that we conclude on this matter so that we are able to move forward as a nation and will be considered to have made our contribution in making Kenya a better society. I thank you.
Thank you, Majority Leader. I do not see any other senator interested in contributing to the same. And I know this motion was moved by Senator Sigei, who is not here. Majority Leader, would you wish to reply to the motion so that we can conclude this business?
Madam Speaker, I reply. I thank you, colleagues who took time to speak on this report. And on behalf of Senator Sigei, who was the Vice Chair of the Mediation Committee, Madam Speaker, I appreciate colleague senators. In accordance to Standing Order number 166, Madam Speaker, I beg to request that we defer the putting of a question until a later date. Sorry, 66, not 166, 66.
And the putting of the question is hereby deferred to the next sitting of Senate. Next order. Senator Dulo, can you approach the clerk's desk? Honorable Senators, for the convenience of the House, I will defer order number 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and I will ask the clerk to call the next order, number 15.
Order number 15, motion. Report of the Standing Committee on Education on a petition to the Senate regarding the discrimination by Teacher Service Commission on payment of hardship and enhanced house allowances to some teachers in Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties.
And the Chairperson, Standing Committee on Education, Senator Betty Monteta.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move a motion on a report of the Standing Committee on Education on a petition to the Senate regarding discrimination by Teacher Service Commission, TSC, on payment of hardship and enhanced house allowance to some teachers in Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties. Madam Speaker, the petitions concerning the discrimination of Teachers Service Commission on payment of hardship allowances and enhanced house allowance to some teachers in...
Senator Betty, can you please approach the clerk's desk for some guidance on that motion? You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the correction. I beg that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee. I beg to move that the Senate adopts the report on the Standing Committee on Education on a petition to the Senate regarding the Discrimination by Teacher Service Commission, TSC, on payment of hardship and enhanced house allowance to some teachers in Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties laid on the table of the Senate on Tuesday, 8th October 2024.
Thank you, Senator.
Madam Speaker, the petition concerning the discrimination by Teacher Service Commission on payment of hardship allowance and enhanced house allowance to some teachers in Kilifi County was reported to the Senate on 27th July 2023, while the petition on discrimination on payment of hardship allowance to some teachers in Taita Taveta County was reported to the Senate on 20th September 2023. After they had been reported, both petitions were referred to the Committee on Education for consideration. Madam Speaker, during the consideration of the two petitions, the committee held 11 meetings and sought information and reports on the issues raised from the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Public Service and Human Capital Development, the Teacher Service Commission, TSC, and the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, SRC. The committee further conducted an oversight visit to Taita Taveta County to meet with the petitioners. Madam Speaker, during its inquiry, the committee observed that both Taita Taveta and Kilifi counties are characterized by shortage of health personnel, inadequate critical working health equipment, infrastructure, health products and technologies. It was also observed that there have been frequent disputes arising from human-wildlife conflicts, land disputes, and human encroachment in riparian areas. In Magarini and Ganze sub-counties of Kilifi County, which borders the Tsavo East National Park, elephants have been reported to invade crop farms, causing significant damage on crops and leading to food insecurity in these areas. Additionally, the elephants camp near water sources, hindering access, and additionally, teachers in Taita Taveta County reported experiencing poor communication and disruption of phone networks from the neighboring countries. Madam Speaker, hardship allowances was introduced immediately after independence to partially compensate public servants working in hardship designated areas and also to compensate public servants due to isolation and separation from their families. These allowances was further provided to compensate for lack of amenities, infrastructure, and challenging environment. Further, the Teacher Service Commission, TSC, informed the committee that the commission has no legal mandate to gazette any area as a hardship area. However, under Regulation 9(1) of the Code of Regulations of Teachers, the TSC is mandated to pay hardship allowance to teachers who qualify or qualified or in designated areas. Madam Speaker, the mandate of classifying the gazetting hardship areas rests with the Ministry of Public Service and Human Capital Development, following a weighted criterion. This criterion is based on parameters such as availability and accessibility of food, potable water, social service and amenities, adequacy of transport and communication services, and socio-economic indicators. Madam Speaker, the committee observed that there exist diverse and varied policies, circulars, and guidelines concerning the designation of hardship areas and payment of hardship allowance. Taita Taveta County, There has been an attempt to address challenges regarding the categorization of payment of hardship allowances and to ratify existing disparities. The Ministry of Public Service and Gender established an interagency technical committee in 2019, which was tasked to examine policies on hardship allowances and streamline payment. Madam Speaker, this interagency technical committee comprised of representatives from the Ministry of Public Works and Human Capital Development, Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government, Ministry of Education, the National Treasury and Planning, the Judiciary, Public Service Commission, Teacher Service Commission, Commission on Revenue Allocation, and Kenya Bureau of Statistics, and the Council of Governors. Madam Speaker, on the question of payment of house allowance, the committee observed that according to Article 230 of the Constitution, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, SRC, is mandated to advise the remuneration and benefits of public officers, including teachers. On such benefit is house allowance that is provided to public officers to cater for accommodation or rent in addition to the wages or salaries of the employee pursuant to Employment Act 2007, Section 31(1). Teachers under permanent and pensionable terms are paid house allowance based on the job group, working conditions, status, and town and geographical area. Madam Speaker, the Urban Areas and Cities Act of 2011 provides a framework of classifying areas as urban areas, towns, cities, or municipalities. To elevate a municipality to city status, the President can grant this through a charter following a resolution from the Senate, provided the municipality meets specific criteria. An area may also be designated as a special purpose city under the Act if it holds significant cultural, economic, or political importance. For a town to be conferred with municipal status, the county assembly must pass a resolution and the county governor can then grant this status through a charter, provided the town meets established criteria. Madam Speaker, the set out criteria and obligations include meeting the population quota, produce an integrated development plan, have demonstrated revenue generation and collection potential, have capacity to effective and efficiently deliver essential services to residents, and have requisite infrastructure. Madam Speaker, despite the clear framework of classifying and upgrading urban areas outlined in the Act, there was a delay in implementing related administrative actions. For instance, while Kilifi Township was officially gazetted as a municipality in March 2019, the SRC did not provide advisory on the house allowance payable until July 31st, 2023. This gap highlights the lag between the attachment of legislative. Further, the creation of designation of hardship areas in the county has not been standardized across the entirety of the public service and is characterized by multiple sector players. However, Madam Speaker, the designated hardship areas do not reflect the extensive presence of remote areas and rural locations which surpass the number other cadres in public service. Madam Speaker, there has been an attempt to address challenges regarding the categorization and payment of hardship allowance to rectify existing disparities. The Ministry of Public Service and Gender established, sorry, Madam Speaker, I think I'd read that. Madam Speaker, while the foregoing, the Committee on Education, therefore, recommends that the Ministry of Public Service and Human Capital Development should, in consultation with the relevant stakeholders, prepare and present to the Senate for consideration an appropriate policy and a statutory instrument on identification and designation of hardship areas. The committee further recommends that criteria for identification and designating hardship areas should be standardized across the entirety of the public service. The weighting criterion for designating these areas should be based on the smallest administrative units used in identification of marginalized areas. The committee report also contains specific areas within the 2 counties that meet the criteria of designation of any area as a hardship area by the Ministry of Public Service and Human Capital Development, and consequently payment of hardship allowance to teachers working in those areas. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I wish to sincerely thank all the stakeholders, the well-researched and articulate oral and written submissions on the issues raised in the 2 petitions. The committee specifically appreciates the Cabinet Secretary, Minister of Public Service and Human Capital Development, and the Chief Executive Officer of the Teacher Service Commission, TSC, for their submissions during the consideration of the petitions. Madam Speaker, I also wish to sincerely thank members of the Committee of Education, their insightful contributions during the consideration and those petitions and development of the 2 reports. We also want to thank your Office of the Clerk, for the support extended to it in execution of its mandate. I thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will beg to move and request Senator Beatrice Ogola to second. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Betty. Senator Beatrice Ogola, can proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank from the onset my sister, Senator Betty Montet, for moving this motion. Senator Betty Montet is the current chair of the Education Committee. Madam Speaker, I want to state from the word go that we know Senator Montet as a team player who will steer the Education Committee to the next level. Senator Montet is an organizer, and often when we have some of our arrangements as women senators, Senator Montet is our designate organizer. Honorable Speaker, I rise to move to second the motion as moved by Senator Montet. And Honorable Speaker, this is a petition to the Senate regarding the discrimination by Teacher Service Commission on the payment of hardships and enhanced house allowance to some teachers in Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties. Madam Speaker, this discrimination may not only be specific to Taita and Kilifi counties, Madam Speaker, but a number of teachers in this republic continue to be discriminated against in the issue of hardship wherever they are serving, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is the mandate of the Ministry of Public Service, Human Capital Development, to designate areas as hardship areas. Madam Speaker, in my experience as a teacher and in my day-to-day working with teachers as a leader, I would like to tell you, Madam Speaker, that most teachers, if not over 80% of teachers in this republic, go through a lot of hardship, Madam Speaker. But basically, Madam Speaker, hardship allowance basically was meant to compensate for the hardship that teachers go through in their areas of work. Secondly, the hardship allowance is supposed to compensate the teachers due to the isolation and the separation from their families. Madam Speaker, I'm a teacher, but I know that most of the teachers in this country, and especially the ones that teach in the rural areas, which really is the over 80% of the areas of the schools in which our teachers teach. Some of those rural areas do not even have houses that teachers can live in dignity, Madam Speaker. And so most of these teachers are not able to live with their families. Most of the times, their families are isolated. They are equally isolated from their families. And Honorable Speaker, this is a profession where, like all other professions, Kenyans join voluntarily. And from their young age, they start their families away from, away in their areas of work, which are far away from even their spouses, Honorable Speaker. It comes with a lot of sacrifice. It comes with a lot of resilience. It comes with a lot of patience from these young public servants. And so these are some of the reasons why the teachers are given hardship allowance. The other reason why they're given house allowance is also to compensate them for lack of basic amenities, which are benefited from by most of other public servants. You have seen in the report of the mediation committee, Madam Speaker, that in setting out the categories of the hardship areas, there's a specification of municipalities, and I can say that it is only in those few municipality areas, and specifically the cities, where you'd find that the teachers, like all other public servants, have access to certain basic amenities. So teachers, wherever they are in those hardship areas, they lack basic amenities like infrastructure. Madam Speaker, in most of the rural areas, teachers go to work on border borders. It is not to say that border is not a good means of transport, Madam Speaker, but this is a case where teachers use majorly border borders on areas where there are no even motorable roads, Madam Speaker. And these are teachers who are equally living far off from the schools. Madam Speaker, in this country, we still have areas where schools even have no access roads. So this calls for teachers to be given hardship allowance. Some of these schools and some of the places where these teachers live and teach do not even have electricities. Madam Speaker, I can say that it is majorly the teaching profession where public servants work away from modernity, Madam Speaker. And so I support the fact that the Ministry of Public Service must relook at the discrimination that has been highlighted in Kilifi and Taita Taveta. But Madam Speaker, it must not only be limited to Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties, Madam Speaker. Some of the innate effects of this discrimination, Madam Speaker, is that the teachers finally have a reduced morale to work. Madam Speaker, teachers who are teaching our children, who are looking to the growth of the youth, to the growth of our children into becoming hardworking Kenyans, into becoming serious adults in this country, when they have no morale in work, Madam Speaker, this directly affects the growth of our children, and finally affects the growth of these young people into the adults that we are looking forward to having. Madam Speaker, another net effect of the discrimination in this hardship allowance is that finally those areas end up with staff shortage. Because, Madam Speaker, a number of teachers are not comfortable in those areas, and so they continuously seek transfers. This even leads to high turnover, Madam Speaker. In the teaching profession, Madam Speaker, there is need to be a harmony in the kind of personnel that attends to children, so that learning might be effectively take place and efficiency, and so that learning takes place and our children get knowledge. There should be some consistency and progress of the teachers that teach these young people. Madam Speaker, another serious net effect of the discrimination of the hardship allowance is that it has even led to a number of resignation of teachers, Madam Speaker. And remember, Madam Speaker, for one to have gone to school, to have been trained into a teacher, that was an investment in the community and investment in this country. So when they resign, it means we are lacking that kind of knowledge where Kenyans invested in the training and the education of these teachers. And lastly, Madam Speaker, another net effect of this discrimination of teachers is a number of teachers end up even deserting from their work stations. Madam Speaker, a number of teachers have even been depressed. I've often dealt with the teachers who had hardship allowances in their previous stations, and when they are transferred to other stations and they lose this, Madam Speaker, they lack even minimum salaries, and they can no longer support their livelihoods and the livelihoods of their families. Madam Speaker, this must be addressed, and some of the way forward in which this can be addressed is that the ministry must relook at the categorization of regions into hardship and non-hardship allowance. And secondly, Madam Speaker, the ministry must look at the existing disparities. Madam Speaker, in the report, as I second, I also noticed that the Ministry of Human Resource, the Ministry of Public Service had formed an interagency technical committee to look at the issue of the disparities. But Madam Speaker, I noticed that there's a further disparity even in the formation of the interagency technical committee. That in this committee, there are representatives from the Ministry of Public Service and Human Capital Development. There's the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government. There's the Ministry of Education, the National Treasury and Planning, the Judiciary, the Public Service Commission, the Teacher Service Commission, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, the Commission on Revenue Allocation, the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, and the Council of Governors. But Madam Speaker, I did not see the representation of the mouthpiece of teachers, that is the Kenya National Union of Teachers and KUPPET. Madam Speaker, in this period of inclusivity, the ministry needed to have an all-inclusive interagency committee that would speak for the teachers, even as the other stakeholders dealt with their mandates. Madam Speaker, as I end my presentation, Madam Speaker, I want to second, but I want to say, Madam Speaker, that teachers, as public servants, we need as a country to relook overally as the welfare of teachers. Madam Speaker, there would be even no need of singling out only specific areas as hardship allowance. For me, Madam Speaker, if you are to take my word, other than the cities, even where the teachers still have hardships because what they earn is not commensurate even to the expectations that they have. All of us look up to teachers as role models. May we as a country, look into the welfare of teachers. I would propose that 3/4 of this country must be categorized as hardship for teachers because of lack of access to schools, lack of certain basic amenities that I've mentioned, including access, including electricity, including even Wi-Fi. Madam Speaker, there are teachers and families who cannot even access, their children cannot even access modern television networks, Madam Speaker. And we expect these teachers to be comfortable and give the best to our children. Madam Speaker, I second this motion by the Chair of Education Committee, Senator Betty Montet.
Thank you, Senator Beatrice. Honorable Senators, I propose the question that the Senate adopts the report of the Standing Committee on Education on a petition to the Senate regarding the Discrimination by Teachers Service Commission, TSC, on payment of hardship and enhanced house allowances to some teachers in Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties, laid on the table of the Senate on Tuesday, 8th October 2024. I will invite senators to contribute to this motion, starting with Senator Catherine Moma.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this report and to congratulate the Chair Education and the outgoing members of the Education Committee, noting that I am a member of the Education Committee. Madam Speaker, this is a very good report, and a report which I hope we can adopt and follow up collectively as the plenary of the Senate to ensure it is actually implemented in the days that we are saying it should be implemented. Madam Speaker, education is the biggest facilitative tool in this country for equality and equalization. And access to education is a sum total of the school infrastructure in terms of buildings, the teachers and the quality of teachers that are given to schools, the books, the quality of laboratories, the security and safety that the students get. And Madam Speaker, we must admit that 15 years since the passing of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, we are doing badly. In fact, we are retrogressing when it comes to the right to access education in this country. Madam Speaker, our constitution is a rights-based constitution, obsessed, if I can use that word, even though it sounds negative. It has the principle of equality and non-discrimination in every space. The principles that are supposed to govern governance within this country in all spaces include the principles of human rights and non-discrimination, equality and equity. Madam Speaker, Chapter 6, which is supposed to be the chapter that guides us, guides everyone to act in a manner that ensures that we bridge the inequality gaps. Madam Speaker, we even went further in Article 204 to even create a fund that has never been operationalized, the Equalization Fund, that was intended to handhold regions that we have historically marginalized. This motion is absolutely important as we discuss the issue of unequal remuneration across the country. And Speaker, the same constitution established so many constitutional commissions with powers to do this. I feel they have failed us. We have the TSC, we have the SRC, we have the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, we have the National Gender and Equality Commission, Commission on Administration of Justice, the JSC, the Parliamentary Service Commission, 47 county public service boards, all of them mandated by the Constitution to implement the Constitution and to apply the principle of equity and equality. You would have imagined that by time we have done 15 years, SRC Public Service Commission would have by now helped us to have a uniform definition on how to define hardship areas. You can see clearly we are going to spend more money to do something that commissions have received funds for and salaries for 15 years, and they have not helped us to do this. In fact, what they have done has contributed to breaching Article 27 on equality and non-discrimination. Madam Speaker, that's why I would like to urge this Senate to actually make this an urgent issue. Summon the Minister for Education, summon all those commissions to find out why point X qualifies to be a hardship area and not point Y. All of us in the Senate were recently in Kilifi. You will agree with me, Kilifi is one of the areas that through our own eyes, we can define as being marginalized. Madam Speaker, there are workers, not just teachers, even policemen, even public servants in other areas who would go there and try their best, but they end up resigning because of the hardship areas. Hardship allowance is one thing that incentivizes those who are undergoing hardships to hold on as we hopefully get the country to bridge the inequality gaps and to bring development in these areas. But clearly, we can see that the tools that the Constitution put in the we put in the Constitution to assist us to bridge these gaps are clearly not doing their job. They are not interpreting their work as they ought to interpret. It is my view, Madam Chair, that this level of inequality needs to be looked at. Why? Because it is at the core of undermining the right to access education for children in Kilifi, for children in the other areas that have not been defined as hardship areas. Madam Speaker, maybe we should even ask Chair Education to get an analysis to find out how many teachers TSC has deployed per school in some of these areas, comparable to the number of teachers that have been deployed to some areas. Madam Speaker, when the local authorities were devolved, we found out that there were some areas that had an overemployment of people while other areas were struggling to have people. We had areas like nursing. We had counties like Mandera, which were struggling to keep enough nurses in their hospitals, while others were struggling how to reduce on the number of the nurses that they had. We must reach a level as a Senate when we can start doing a human resource audit to find out how many of these resources are serving County X comparable to County Y, and how the marginalized counties can actually be handheld to ensure citizens in those counties do not suffer lack of access to services because we are deliberately refusing to implement the principle of equality and non-discrimination, the principle of equity and equality. Madam Speaker, you will agree with me today in Kenya, the political question on the table is equity. Whatever factions are out there, whatever communities are out there, everybody is mourning on how they are not accessing which kind of service. And the most important thing that we need to do as Parliament, National Parliament, as the executive, National Executive needs to be doing, is to engage in deliberate moves to handhold the regions that have been marginalized. Madam Speaker, these regions' children are suffering from this marginalization. I nearly cried when the Speaker, during the funeral of the father, talked about his classmate who was a top student but never got to proceed because he was poor. And yet, Madam Speaker, this is the same country that has bursaries being issued by every other person. Bursary by members of parliament, bursaries by MCS, bursaries by governors, bursaries by the president, bursaries by Kenya National Library Services. Bursaries, in fact, we are not counting the Wings to Fly by Equity, the Cooperative Bank, the KCB, and the ordinary Kenyans are still fundraising for people to go to school. And yet, we have more kids, poor kids, out of school with all these monies. I asked the Minister for Education a question recently, or to give us an aggregate of the funds that are going, public funds that are being spent on bursaries. He said he does not know. He doesn't receive returns on CDF. And that is the Ministry of Education. Madam Speaker, if we don't get education right in this country, if we do not get health right in this country, we should be ready to fall off the cliff. And this issue is just one issue about TSC teacher salary, but it is about a string of aspects of inequality. Madam Chair of Education, maybe we should even try to find out how many schools in Kilifi and other similar areas have laboratories. How many of these schools have kids? How many of these schools even have buildings under which they are studying? Then we must ask ourselves, is it fair that those children should be assessed at the same level with kids who have facilities that are overflowing so much, overflowing so that now what we are looking for is to give them a meal. The next thing we are looking for is the quality of meal we are giving them. But we have a Kenyan child who is schooling under a tree. 15 years after the passing of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, I must say the parliaments, the previous parliaments, and ourselves need to take the issue of equity seriously. We need to take the issue of access to education seriously. We need to pull together to ensure that the public health insurance scheme that has just been introduced by the Kenya Kwanza government works, and the government needs to admit that there are many things that need to be corrected about it, and all of us need to find a way of getting it to work. Because when it does not work, what are we doing? We are killing people. Many of the people we are killing do not have the voice we have. Many of the people we are killing are not, in our view, as the political class, important enough to make headlines. I think there is a reason why Kenyans were obsessed with the words of human rights, of equity and equality and non-discrimination in every chapter. They wanted it in governance. They wanted it in sharing of resources. Even the devolved governance system is the #1 tool of ensuring equity. So I want to urge our chair and our committee that beyond what KUPPET and NAT have brought to us, Kilifi branches, and I'd like to thank them so much, and I'd like to encourage them to bring the other aspects of education that I am sure that we will be able to find that the inequalities in the education sector are not working. If we can't get right our education system, Madam Speaker, we are killing the nation. One more thing, Madam Speaker. Sometimes I wish the Secretariat could do a tally on where the children of members of parliament go to school. Maybe it doesn't matter because our children go to private schools. Maybe the clerks of the Committee on Education need to do that research for us and tell us what percentage of children of leaders in this country, all of them being paid by taxpayers, are going to the schools for which they vote those meager resources, for which they waste those resources that you call bursary, for which they waste those resources that are supposed to build the schools, for which they waste resources that should actually be spent on the most important profession, teaching. But we've now reduced teaching to the least important profession. Madam Speaker, we need to smell the coffee. We need to do the right thing. I support.
Thank you, Senator. There are no other contributors to this motion, so I'll request Senator Betty to reply.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I beg to reply. Madam Speaker, in replying, I wish to thank all the senators who have contributed to this motion. And Madam Speaker, from whatever we've gathered as a committee, I wish to say that this is a very important motion. It's affecting not only Kilifi and Taita Taveta counties, but affecting most of those hard-hit areas in our republic. Madam Speaker, I wish to say that we've gotten very good insights where this committee will sit and look into, and I pray that the House adopts the report so that whatever suggestions and considerations which the committee has put into place are going to be considered. Madam Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 66.3, I request that we defer putting of the question to a later date. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Betty. The putting of question is deferred to the next sitting of Senate. Next order.
Order number 16, motion, report of the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries on a petition to the Senate regarding the catastrophic maize diseases that farmers in Bomet County have endured for the last 12 years.
The mover, who is the chairperson of Standing Committee on Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries, is not here, so this will be deferred to the next sitting. It's order.
Order number 17, motion, report of the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries on a petition to the Senate regarding graft investigation by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission on the West Kano irrigation scheme.
Wafula, who is the mover of this motion, is not present, so it will be deferred to the next sitting.
Order number 18, motion, report of the Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism on a petition to the Senate regarding alleged fraudulent dealings at Diageo PLC, East African Breweries Limited, Kenya Breweries and UDV Kenya Limited.
The chairperson, Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism, Senator Issa, is not in, so this will be deferred to the next sitting.
Order number 19, motion, report of the Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism on a petition to the Senate on the need for the introduction of the Hospitality Professionals Bill.
The chairperson, Standing Committee on Trade, Industrialization and Tourism, is equally not present, so this will be deferred to the next sitting. Honorable Senators, there being no other business on the order paper, the Senate stands adjourned until Tuesday, 4th March 2025 at 2:30 p.m.
Tunaingia vijijini, mijini na hata jijini kukuletea taarifa